Colleagues, welcome back to the office and welcome to our podcast for today. My name is Steve Yoss. I will be your instructor and presenter, and I am joined today by Andrew Argue from the Corvee company to discuss some of the challenges and planning with respect to our firms and how we can offer and provide better services to our clients in tax and firm administration. Morning, Andrew. How are you today?
Steve, doing great. Thanks for having me.
Excellent. Thank you so much for coming. Well, Andrew, we've got an action-packed hour planned here where we're going to go ahead and discuss some of the major features and functions of Corvee and how it can fit into a firm's technology stack. What I'd like to talk about with you today is really kind of exploring what it means to use this inside of a firm and, really kind of what is tax planning, how is tax planning occurring in today's environment. It just seems, Andrew, that, there's so many different options from, what forms to file, how to conduct it, what do I do as an S Corp, do I do as an LLC? I mean, it just seems that the tax options and the laws and legislation around this are just constantly expanding, man. So I really want to get a good insight on how you guys are doing this for your organization and for our clients these days. And we're going to talk about some of the benefits of this and why not only is it in the benefit of the client in terms of finding better strategies to assist with whatever their goals are. I mean, it's not just always minimization of tax, right? I mean, there's other benefits, it seems, to tax planning to consider as well, and what might those be to the organization. And then I think we really want to kind of talk about some of the different ways that we can utilize Corvee inside of our practice and what it looks like to actually beyond tax planning. I know there's some options with respect to firm administration, document management, portal solutions, payment solutions, and more. And so I'm really excited to explore this with you and learning firsthand from you specifically on where and how Corvee is benefiting clients today. And let me just ask you real quick, is there any specific things that you'd like to share with our audience? Anything in particular you'd like to highlight?
I think all this looks great.
Perfect. Excellent. Well, let me give my guest here a little bit more of an introduction. We'll do a couple of compliance things and let's just go ahead and dive into it. And for those of you who are watching live with us, whether it's on YouTube, Facebook, or joined here with Zoom, I'd love to know if there's anything in particular you'd like to ask the man himself, the myth, the man, the legend. So if you wouldn't mind, if you have any specific learning expectations for today, feel free to open up the chat pod, shoot us a message, let us know what you're interested in, and we'd be happy to address it. Now, again, my guest today is Andrew Argue. He's the co-founder and president of Corvee. Prior to working with Corvee, he had a long and storied history working with other entrepreneurial efforts, including his blog, The Bean Counter, which was help me out here. I think it was a tool and a website primarily to help young accountants kind of learn the profession and trade and, kind of learn a little bit about what it means to be a CPA, right?
Exactly. Yep.
Oh, man. There's so much. I grew up in an accounting practice. My dad's a CPA, so I kind of knew what I was getting into ahead of time. But, there's so much that's not taught in class, about the profession, especially in things like assurance, where, you got to learn from other people. So that was pretty cool that you had that. And then also accountingtax.com, which eventually became Corvee, which we'll talk about here. And I know prior to this, you worked at PricewaterhouseCoopers as an assurance and auditing. Very, very cool. And I mean, amazingly, your background here, being part of the various different lists, part of, with respect to the Accounting Today top lists and others. And I think you hail from Florida, right? Great state of Florida, the Sunshine State.
Originally from Oklahoma, but yes, I live in Florida.
All right. And I think you went to the University of Tampa, if I remember reading that correctly.
Yep,
right?
correct.
Both undergraduate and graduate.
Yep.
Very cool. Well, thank you so much for coming. And we're going to get started here just in a second. Now, for those of you who are watching live, just as a reminder, if you're watching on Zoom, you are attending live. We're going to go ahead and have some attendance prompts to verify your attendance. There'll be a total of 4. Why don't we go ahead and test that out right now, make sure that works for you. And if you are attending after the fact, if you're watching this for self-study credit, please note that we're going to confirm your attendance through a short exam that you'll complete at the conclusion of watching or listening to this. And if you're watching as a podcast, please remember that you can earn a credit. We're giving this away as a free credit today. If you check out cpetoday.com and just search for Corvee, you'll find our class and you'll be able to complete this as a self-study class and earn a credit for watching or listening. And if you're a new watcher or listener to the podcast, Besides this, why don't you try out another podcast of your choosing, 100% for free. You can use one free podcast at checkout to get a credit of your choice in whatever class you'd like. And we've got a couple other classes coming up here on Corvee, so maybe you want to check that out. All righty, so let's go ahead and dive into this, Andrew. And I've got just some questions here, and again, please feel free to kind of lead in with whatever you think might be interested here. And I'd really like to start off a little bit more. We're getting a sense of you, and I'd love to know a little bit about your experience prior to starting Corvee. I know you had other entrepreneurial efforts like the Bean Counter and accountingtax.com. A decade ago, you worked as an auditor for PwC, and like me, I'm not in public accounting anymore. It seems like a lifetime ago. How did some of those experiences help you with Corvee? I mean, I've got to assume you picked up some thoughts and some experiences that maybe help hone and shape your vision for the application we know today. But maybe share with us some of the motivation, I guess, for this application.
Yeah, I think when I look back at my journey, I've always done things in accounting, and with the industry that is tax and accounting firms. And really the journey to start what is today Corvee kind of started when my wife and I had our very first small business. So we had our own business, and we had our own tax preparer because I was a CPA, but I was from more of an auditing background. And we had somebody else who was preparing our taxes. My wife's also a CPA, so we had a CPA preparing our taxes. I was a CPA, and he was doing that for a couple of years for us. And then I had, so one of my friends who said, "Hey, you got to, check in with this guy. He does, a little bit of, this thing called tax planning." And I didn't really know what that was at that point, but it kind of made sense. You kind of get it. You think you know what it is from your mind. And I was like, well, I already have a guy doing my taxes, but I'll meet this other guy. And, after, just a few minutes, he was able to find a number of things that we were missing with our current provider. And it was sort of like a joke at the time, like, how many CPAs do you need in a room to file a sort of a basic return? But he made a couple of quick recommendations. And in that moment, we ended up saving, I think at the time, it wasn't that much, maybe $16,000 or $17,000. But it was just a few strategies, a few things that we were missing that we really should have been doing for, the year or so before that. And this is when we just started, we had a really small business. And that was kind of my first awakening, like, even if you think you have somebody who's doing the right things for you, you might not. And nothing really happened at that point in terms of, we didn't start a business about this. We didn't start Corvee. What is Corvee Tax Planning today? But that always sort of stuck in my head. And over the years, we worked with tax and accounting firms in a variety of areas. Largely before Corvee, we worked with them on practice development. So helping them get clients, helping them with marketing and sales. And, we've worked with a little over 10,000 different tax and accounting professionals at firms and looking to start their own firms. And so we've had a lot of experience. And when I was working with the firms in that, over the years, I started to realize that one accountant that I had that was preparing my return wasn't kind of unique. It was, in fact, most of the firms that I came across, kind of were not spending that much time with their tax clients, not doing anything before the year was over. And if you were to sit down with a tax professional and look at their firm, and you were to say, all right, you've got, 200 business returns, you've got 400 individual returns. If you were to go return by return and take the time to do that, you would find that the vast majority of these clients are overpaying. So in some cases, because they're just, missing things that should be in the return. In other cases, it's because they're not really educating the taxpayer about all the things they should be doing. And when we kind of started to realize that, we said, hey, what would be a great way to fix this? Like, what would be the ideal way to do it? And that's really what has come down into becoming Corvee today, which I know we'll talk a little bit about.
Sure.
And it really helps, a tax professional, tax advisor is what we call them, which is mostly tax and accounting firm owners and team members, some financial advisors, some tax attorneys. When they sit down with a taxpayer, really trying to figure out what are all the things that we can do to improve their tax situation. Not just what I know. I might know 5 or 6 things in my head that I might have learned, or picked up along the way. But today we have a little over 1,700 strategies, the federal level across all 50 states on a variety of categories. And so on average, when they sit down, when a tax advisor sits down, they think they can save their clients. We've run this test with hundreds of firms, say, bring a business owner. On average, I think they could save about $20,000 But when they go through and they use Corvee, they end up finding almost $70,000 in savings. So about triple what they think, a little more than triple what they think they can save their client. And so that really is the value proposition, is to kind of get them more in line with the value that the taxpayers actually already think they're getting.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic, and I think even $17,000. I mean, that's a nice chunk of change that you could spend elsewhere. I mean, and I've always thought about, with respect to tax saving, that money goes straight to the bottom line. I mean, it's found money. I was going to spend it anyway, and now I get to recover that and be able to, either buy something for the business to expand operations, or at least keep the profits inside,
Right.
and not pay Uncle Sam.
Right. Well, I think, if you look at it, most small businesses in the United States make 10 to 20% margin. If you just take 10, just make it really easy math, whatever amount a tax advisor helps their taxpayer save, let's say it's $10,000, that's the equivalent of $100,000 in revenues almost, because exactly to your point, it's sort of post-tax savings. So it's, if somebody were to go to a small business and say, hey, I could save you $100,000 in taxes, they're really saying, hey, I can help you make an extra $1 million in revenues, which would be the same, in terms of the value proposition. We don't always think of it that way, but that is true.
Yeah, no, I completely understand that. I mean, like, net income is a lot harder to earn than revenue, so, if you could find a way of either decreasing costs or increasing revenue, that will directly lead you more profits. And this is a way of decreasing that huge cost. So you're making more money with less resources.
Yeah, it's that old saying, it's not about how much you make, it's how much you keep.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, kind of looking at the tax world these days, I mean, it's gigantic. I mean, I see your point a minute ago where you were saying, like, I'd heard about tax planning, didn't really know that much about it. I mean, I think from the outside looking in, the public views accounting kind of like medicine, in the sense that, like, oh, you're a doctor, you obviously know everything from plastic surgery to ear, nose, and throat, and about everything in between. It's like, well, no, we all kind of have our specialty. My specialty has always been in accounting information systems and building software. I know you worked in audit. There's a huge degree of nuance. But tax is so fragmented. I mean, you got 50 jurisdictions just in the states, plus the territories. And then on top of that, you got federal tax, which is complicated. And then you got several different types of tax, from estate to income to sales tax to payroll taxes, which is like a whole nother, ball of wax that I don't even care to get into. I personally, I have no interest in payroll. It's just so complicated now. Kind of speaking to this, I mean, we got Title 26 here, where the IRS laws primarily live, and the rules and regulation. I mean, it's almost 7,000 pages long. I mean, how is anybody expected to know this, and be able to effectively find those little nuggets of wisdom, that can save the client tremendous amount of money. It seems like there's lots and lots of different strategies that could be pursued. From your perspective, I mean, like, when you were starting to build Corvee, how did you, I guess, come to figure out, the 1,700 strategies that you guys have built? And I mean, what are you doing today to kind of keep on top of, with respect to the changes in the legislation? I got to imagine you got to have a full-time legislative team just keeping track of everything.
Yeah, we have a lot of people on the team that are just focused on the strategies and all of the different changes that come out. I think, when we first started, we had a great community of tax and accounting professionals. And so we had an event actually back in 2018, and it was called the Tax Planning Boot Camp. And we brought down a couple hundred tax professionals down to Florida for a 3-day event. And we brought a bunch of them up on stage to present sort of what were the real tax strategies that they were used to using. And so we had them all present, and we kind of left that event with a handful of tax strategies. And that was kind of how we originally, realized, okay, these are all the different ways that tax and accounting professionals and financial advisors and tax attorneys are making recommendations. And so that was kind of the initial starting point. But then we started to take a step back and think, okay, so these are some of the common ones, some of the ones that these individuals that were presenting happen to know. But we started looking at, okay, the federal level, all of the different states, and really starting to define, like, what is a strategy? What does it mean to be a strategy? And today we estimate there's a little over 20,000 strategies that are out there. It's not really something that we will know until we get there, because obviously things are changing every day in every jurisdiction. But we estimate that if when we complete about 20,000 strategies, we're at about 1,700 today, we'll be covering probably about 95% of the savings and the value that a taxpayer is owed. And the way that we look at it is, all of these politicians that have passed these laws in all these jurisdictions, they've passed them because they want the taxpayers to have access to these particular benefits. They say, hey, you owe this money in taxes. However, if you're willing to take these activities, then you don't have to pay tax on these particular funds and so forth. And so they're trying to incentivize a variety of different behaviors. And so the challenge is it's so complicated. And most tax professionals are just have the best heart. However, the tools that they have and the technology that they have don't really give them the ability to make these kinds of recommendations. And the companies out there that do, tax software and provide tools for tax preparation and even tax planning, there's some great companies as well, but it's a very challenging problem. It's a very difficult problem to, how to understand, okay, how do we apply all these strategies to all of these different taxpayers? They might just be an individual. They might have a business. They might have schedules. Some of these might work for last year. Some might work for this year, next year. And so it's a very difficult thing, and no one has really tackled it. And, for us, we are really still just at the beginning. But, the key thing that we think about is for a tax advisor, the standard can't be that, they give a perfect set of recommendations every time, because it's almost just not possible. I mean, some people are so obscure or so small, and there's so many clients out there they can't. But the real thing is, can they give better recommendations than anyone else that taxpayer could find? And when somebody comes and uses Corvee, that is the case just over and over and over again. We don't find every single opportunity that the taxpayer can, because we're not there yet, and it's a very challenging problem. They can find dramatically more in savings and recommendations than they ever could on their own.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's impossible to know every single possible in and out. I mean, there's experts who work with, like, let's say farmers, for example. I mean, I don't know all the farming tax credits and all the, I've even found like there's weird stuff like in the tax treaties between like USA and Canada, that can sometimes be very beneficial to a client to know. But, to kind of have, it feels like Corvée can be like the eyes and ears for that practitioner. They're AI essentially in some ways, to be able to do simulations to figure out what strategy will ultimately yield the best benefit to the client with whatever that might be.
Yeah, no, you bring up a good point. I mean, so we last year just had coverage at the federal level. This year we released all 50 US states. There's many other jurisdictions though. There's about 270 different countries and jurisdictions in the world. And so when you look at that, each of those countries has their own rules and laws and regulations. And then to your point, there's also the interconnections between them, right? So, there's a lot more to do. And so even if you look at it just in the United States, we have, only a percentage of the strategies and the forms that are covered today. And then if you look at the world, obviously there's so much more opportunity there. And no one's really done a great job with that either, doing multiple country, tax preparation and compliance or tax planning. And so that's definitely something that we plan to do over the long term.
Sure. I'm reminded, I'm sure you've heard this, the double Irish with the Dutch sandwich, is a tax strategy. And you start thinking about this and you're like, how did anybody figure this out? Like multi-country, multi-jurisdiction, and being able to, essentially just move paper really, from one state to the other, but it could yield dramatic tax savings, to these organizations. Yeah, it might cost you, if you're a Google or an Apple, a couple million to get set up, but I mean, the potential upside is tens of millions in tax savings as well.
Yeah. Well, and it depends on what the particular strategy is. I mean, sometimes you have a situation exactly like you mentioned where, okay, this taxpayer, it is just a little bit of paperwork for them. And a lot of times you see that because they're actually already acting in a manner in which they're qualified for a particular strategy. I mean, a great example of that is like a research and development tax credit. It's like, hey, your business is already, just because of the nature of the business, investing in research and development. You just never heard of this credit. All we have to do is just share up the paperwork and you're already qualified. You're already acting that way. However, there are, many different things where they actually do have to sort of substantively change their facts and circumstances in order to qualify for particular things. And so that's always the thing too, when you're a tax advisor giving a recommendation, is this something where, you don't need to change anything. We just need to like shore up the documentation. Or is this something where, you do have to change your business and your life circumstances? And then are you willing to do that? What's involved in that? What are the different steps for implementation, the documentation requirements? And, that's where it gets, for a lot of tax advisors, even too complicated. They just kind of, okay, I don't know if I want to really get into all this because I don't know really what are the steps for implementation. And then they get worried about giving the recommendation. And so, But the truth of the matter is, no matter which one it is, most of these taxpayers want to know and then make a decision based on, the amount that they could potentially save and then the different steps that they would have to take to get that savings.
Sure, sure. I can totally appreciate that. And I feels like with some of these, especially some of the more complicated ones, anything involving like international stuff, which I know is very high end for the most part, but even things as like, the differences between incorporating in Delaware versus incorporating in California or Florida, or even now, I mean, especially with Wayfair versus South Dakota Supreme Court ruling, some of these economic nexuses that can arrive. I mean, at some point, it feels like you almost need to have a law degree now, as a CPA to be able to answer some of these questions. I don't mind answering simple questions for people, but then some of these things, they get so very specific about, and it's not just about what's written, it's about how you interpret the writing of that
Right.
law as well. It makes it really difficult to know as a practitioner everything.
Right. Yeah. And it is an interesting space because, a lot of people in the United States think that you have to be a CPA in order to do taxes. However, it's kind of a unique category of sort of law and regulation because the government is imposing these taxes onto taxpayers, that gives the taxpayers certain rights that they are kind of going to be able to have, at least in our society as it is today. And so because of that, they have trouble really fully requiring people to take certain exams and so forth to be able to be tax preparers and to give advice on taxes. So it is something where, I mean, really, even though you feel like you need to be a lawyer, the reality of it is anyone can prepare taxes. Anybody can get a PTIN and become a tax preparer and start giving tax advice. I mean, they've got to be careful when they get into that, and they've got to go through a process to learn and so forth. But even though it feels like you should be a lawyer, you really don't have to be at all. In fact, you don't even have to have a college degree, truth be told. Really anybody can do it. And it's the interesting part because taxpayers have those kind of rights as opposed to many other types of law.
Yep. Yeah, I can appreciate that. And personally, I think there's a big difference between somebody could slap some numbers on a 1040 easy and like what you're doing here in terms of advising businesses and individuals with respect to, long-term strategy. I mean, it's a growth value opportunity for the practitioner to consider implementing this.
Yeah. And you'd be surprised as well. I mean, there's a difference. There's different kind of ways that I see a lot of the tax advisors doing tax planning today. If you look at it, I mean, even just learning a couple of basic strategies, half a dozen strategies and being able to give those to business owners, that can actually be simpler than, being a tax preparer and, doing tax preparation, because some of these things, they're not that difficult to understand. Once you start to say, I don't want to just do the 3 to 5 basic ones. I want to do like everything that applies to my clients. You're 100% right. That's where it gets quite, you've got to really commit to it as a career and as a profession. And then you've got to make sure that you're charging the right amount. You're also hiring the right type of people that can deliver that alongside you and then have the right type of sophistication to be able to deliver those types of services. But, to get started, it can be very simple and even simpler than, committing to doing tax preparation in some instances. And so it's a great way to get into tax because you're providing a lot more value. It's a simpler, case. And then obviously over time, as you go more and more, it gets increasingly complex.
Sure. Well, I think it's a good time to have a review question here for our folks that are watching live, and then also for our self-study audience as well. We have to do these for our NASBO compliance here. And so a quick review question, then we'll continue our conversation here with Andrew. How many pages are in the Internal Revenue Code? Okay, if you were to go look this up. And we've got a couple of different answers here. It's not 2256. It's not 4357. Thankfully, it's not 687010. I think unfortunately, it seems like an enormous, probably longer, it feels longer than that, but the IRS code is 6,871 pages. And thankfully, Corvee's here to learn that so you don't have to. Your other answers here, unfortunately, either too short or too long. The correct answer is 6,871 pages. And it seems like it gets a couple hundred pages longer every single year, Andrew.
Yeah, well, it was interesting that you guys had that question and had that number because it's something that we've kind of looked up a number of times, but it's very difficult to know because it's also not just the IRS code. There's so many other different, publications, and then there's also all of the states. And so we've looked into that number a variety of times, and then it's also ever changing, right? So it is almost an unknowable number in a way. I don't, and it's something that is interesting just in terms of the way you define it.
And I mean, that's just the USC code. That's just in the federal level. I mean, that doesn't include every other state jurisdiction. And then on top of that, you got obviously all the specific stuff, for state taxes, payroll taxes, so on and so forth. Um, Yeah, I mean, it's really difficult. I can tell you, I track, for example, legislation. I've got several different tools that we use to track like CPE legislation and accounting rules legislation for ethics and things of this nature. And I mean, even at the practitioner level, the laws guiding the practitioner, I mean, they're constantly changing too, let alone the tax legislation. So yeah, you definitely have thankfully you're doing the heavy lifting, so the practitioner does not have to. So, kind of looking at this a little bit further, Corvee playing in the long game here, in terms of kind of putting that client, setting him up in the best position possible. I've always felt that, planning is, and I've got a quote a little bit later on from Ben Franklin here, that failure to plan is a plan to fail, and that with Corvee, it's about setting that client up for that long game, setting them up for success here, and looking at this, you can have several different strategies. Some are complementary. Some obviously, if you go this way, you can't go that way. You can't be both a C corp and an LLC at the same time, but like maybe choosing the jurisdiction in terms of where you incorporate or form your partnership. Some of these strategies are time sensitive, and some, require, as you mentioned, some actual changes with respect to the actual business itself, whether it be something as simple as filing new forms or actually changing the method and manner in that company operates. I just got to ask, for your software being able to analyze all these different strategies, I mean, what are you guys using from a tech side of this? Is it like artificial intelligence, machine learning, something else?
Yeah.
I've got to assume you got an army of people that are really kind of analyzing this at both the state and federal level. As the wizard behind the curtain here, maybe you can pull back and tell us a little bit about the tech.
I think what we originally started out thinking about is we kind of sat down and we were like, okay, like I mentioned earlier, if you look at one of these firms and you look at their clients, say 200 business returns, 400 individual returns, and if you were to go back and look at the last 10 years and you were to say, okay, if these returns would have been filed perfectly, how much less tax would they have paid? And so we sort of thought about the problem from that perspective. And so in order to do that, there's a variety of things that we had to do. So for example, when you think about tax, you have to look at the forms themselves.
Yeah.
And so we basically created a tool where we took all the forms from the federal and all the state level, not all of them, because there's actually about 20,000 in total, but we've taken hundreds and hundreds of forms, and we're adding new forms all the time to be able to just figure out how much does this particular taxpayer owe? And there's no way to do that without actually looking at the forms. And so we start with the form to figure out how much tax does the person owe. And then what we do is we apply the strategies to those forms and say, okay, well, if these strategies would have been applied or if they are applied in this particular year. And so one of the unique things about our organization is a lot of companies that develop software use, software engineers, and those software engineers build the product, and then the customers use the product. For us, we have engineers. However, our engineers built a product so that our tax team basically is able to create all of the forms and the strategies. And so, our tax team is much larger than our engineering team, but both of them are actually a kind of software engineer and developer. And because of that, we've been able to cover so many strategies so quickly and so many forms so quickly. And what we'll do is we'll scan a form, bring that form in, figure out how much the taxpayer owes in taxes, apply all the strategies for this year. In some cases, the prior year, we'll do the future year as well, and figure out how much that taxpayer can save. And so, yeah, that's a little bit about how we thought about approaching the problem and how we originally kind of got into it.
Sure. It sounds a lot like function over form. Here's the output of what we want, and then we work back into the technology to support it.
Yeah, I think, there's obviously an entire technology stack that we have that supports what we deliver. But the main thing that we focus on for anybody watching this today is what is the real result and the real value that they get from that technology stack. And the real value is that when you sit down with a taxpayer, that, you're going to be able to find 2, 3, 4 times more in tax savings than what you could find on your own in your mind or with spreadsheets. And that really is the value of what ends up coming at the end of the meeting.
Sure. One of the things I think is really cool with Corvee is that it, in a lot of ways, democratizes the tax planning. In most firms, even a small or mid-sized firm, you're going to have one or two guys that are savants, as it relates to 1040 or 1065, 1120 type stuff. But, your average staff preparer, or even other partners that matter. I mean, they might be the assurance partner or the consulting partner. They're not going to know, every single in and out there. And there's only roughly 8 to 10 hours if it's tax season, maybe 18 hours in a day that you can pursue. But one of the things I think is pretty cool with Corvee is that anybody in the firm can do this tax planning. It's not just having to be the partner or that one expert.
Yeah, I think that, generally what we see for firms that have, let's say, less than 50 team members, you're going to see a situation where the owners or the partners of the firm feel like in their head, they're sort of a genius when it comes to tax planning. And they kind of, the tax partners at least, and they feel like, they know things, and, their team just can never pick it up. A staff could never do this. A manager could never do this. However, if I were to look at it and I were to take a staff or a manager that's using Corvee, and I were to take a partner or an owner of a firm that isn't, I would just say, okay, who could really get the better result for the client? I would bet on the staff or the manager paired with that technology to be able to find the best result for the client. And so what that really does, to exactly your point, is it allows that partner to start to get the rest of the team educated, start to get the rest of the team with the abilities to be able to provide a much higher level of service to the clients that before it just wasn't really possible. Because yes, of course, if you're the owner or you're the partner of the firm, you've been doing this for many years. You've done this with maybe 5, 7, 10, 15, 20 times as many taxpayers as the people that are on your team. And so obviously you're going to see a lot more. But when your team can start to use and pair their, abilities with the technology, they can actually provide a better result than you can, even with your experience. And so sometimes that's a little bit of an ego hit for people. But, when you kind of get into it, at the end of the day, the real thing here isn't that you're smarter than your team. In fact, you'd prefer if your team was smarter than you, then they could go out and serve clients. Taxpayers would prefer that too. So they can work with your team and they don't have to work with the owner. And so it's actually better for the business overall. Sometimes people are like, well, I'm, the best tax person, since existence, right, of taxes or something. But, once you can kind of get over that and realize, like, we're here to build a great firm, build a great business, have great team members, and get the best result for our taxpayer clients, then it really is powerful to be able to, exactly as you said, get that information into the hands of everybody at the firm.
Sure. Just to throw in another question here, kind of about your background too. It's something I thought that was really interesting. About a decade ago, you interviewed Tim Ryan at PricewaterhouseCoopers about leadership within the profession. And I found the video and I watched it and I really enjoyed it. And he talked about in that video, this idea of like the personal capital account and the importance of self-teaching. You remember that interview at all when you
it's funny. I do remember the interview because obviously Tim Ryan is the current CEO of PricewaterhouseCoopers today. He wasn't CEO at the time, but he was like the number 2 guy. And, I had quit that firm. It was like my first job ever out of college, first full-time job. And I quit that job and I emailed him after I quit, like, hey, can I get an interview with this guy? And he was gracious enough to do it. And so I went to New York City and I did have that interview. And now he's gone on to become the CEO of PricewaterhouseCoopers. I'm going to have to go back and watch it though, because to your point, it's been about 10 years and I'm trying to remember like what in the world was all the content there. But I'll have to go back and rewatch it. But I do remember having that interview with Tim.
Well, so in that, he said, kind of like in that, what I thought was really interesting, it was this idea of like the personal capital account, that you're always contributing to it by learning new skills, adding new value, and that you could leverage that capital account either to grow in your career or to grow in that client relationship, and you're finding new ways to be able to engage. He talked about, for example, pursuing new and exciting projects to learn new opportunities, the idea of being a lifelong learner here. And, 10 years later, it kind of feels like Corvee's fulfilling on that advice that he said, by giving practitioners new ways to engage with their clients and learn new opportunities, and really kind of, I think, provide newer services. I've always been of the position that, and a big reason why I left public accounting was I felt most of what I was going to do would be automated by the end of my career. I didn't really want to kind of be stuck in a profession that, frankly, AI was probably going to do most of it. But with tax planning, and there was actually another report put out very recently that assurance and tax planning were the two things that were not going to be replaced easily by AI in the near future. it really feels that what you're doing here is you're giving practitioners a new way to expand their opportunities and their new ways to be able to engage and grow that relationship with the client.
Yeah. And I think, when you look at it, the mission of our company is to empower smarter tax decisions. And,
Sure.
the way that we think about it is so many times those tax professionals are sitting there and they're giving an advice to a client, a piece of advice to a client, but it's really not the best piece of advice. And bless their heart, it's not their fault. A great example of that is, and you just see this time and time again with people that they get super excited. They learn about some basic strategy, like you can, basically register as an S corporation and you can save on self-employment tax. They get super excited. Yeah. And then they don't realize that, that client actually lives in Tennessee and there's this other type of tax there called like a franchise tax and an excise tax. And so actually that was like the bad recommendation there. And now that client's paying even more in taxes before, and they've got also more fees to me. They paid for this legal setup, then we have to unwind this thing and they're pissed, right? And so I think, the whole thing that we try to do is really just supercharge, their mind so that they can, keep away from those landmines, find more and more opportunities. And I think of it almost like most people are just kind of giving advice, looking through a keyhole because they can't really see everything that's there. And it feels like you're trying to describe to the client what's in that room, but you can only see through the keyhole. And, so if we can just widen their view a little bit and get them more and more and more of the room, maybe you never get that top left corner, or maybe you don't know everything, but if you know more than anybody else and you know more than you did yesterday, then you're going to have a place for quite some time. And I think, that is not surprising to me that there is that report about audit and about, tax planning being less likely to be automated. I think with tax planning and the problem of taxes overall, a lot of it comes down to when you're doing tax preparation and compliance, it's very, much about just filing the returns based on what happened. Now, there's still problems there because a lot of things do get missed, especially for business owners.
Yes.
However, when you look at this area of, okay, what are all the things I could do? A lot of it's about decisions and thinking through different options and comparing the different ways I could organize my business, comparing the different ways I could organize my life. And it's not just about saving money in taxes. It might also be about asset protection. It might also be about retirement. It might also be about the way I support my family members or my children or my charities. And so there's a combination of decisions that, most taxpayers need someone to bounce those ideas off of and to really make the best set of decisions. And it just so happens that, especially when they have a business, there's tremendous amount of savings. And so, they can take a little bit of extra time to investigate what the best options are and do that with a professional advisor.
Sure. And I was looking here. I could send this to you. It was McKinsey that did the study on this, on accounting automation. They kind of broke it down in the different sectors there. But tax is really kind of where rubber meets the road in terms of automation, where it really doesn't just about bank rules or APIs where you can actually import a lot of this information in, but a lot of it can just be standardized because essentially there's only one way to do a W-2 or a 1099 or importing into the system. But, it really kind of requires that kind of global vision of not only just looking at the individual, but, often it's the individual plus an entity of some sort, or maybe multiple entities, that individual might own or control. So, but that's what they kind of went on and talked about with respect to automation. I thought that in terms of finding new opportunities for a client, where you could still engage, it is really kind of in these, I think, where, again, it requires more than just the ability to be able to put some numbers into the software and be able to use the software. I can't play the cello, but I can hand a cello or, over to Yo-Yo Ma and you get a beautiful sound. I mean, it's the same thing with Corvee here. I think this is a great practitioner level tool.
Well, I think right now, most taxpayers that own a business in the United States of America, they kind of see the results of their tax situation in their email. I mean, there's many people that are using client portals and adopting that type of technology. However, many of them are just getting an email from their tax preparer and they don't really know what's going on behind the scenes. They can't see anything. They can't see, what strategies that I take, what strategies that I miss. Most taxpayers actually don't know how much tax they're paying. They might know their refund amount or how mumuch they owe at the end of the year, but they don't really know how much tax they're paying, certainly not by different jurisdictions or by different types of tax. And so, there's just with the way the current problem is being solved between the tax advisors and the taxpayers. There's just a much better opportunity for transparency and making sure everybody knows what's available so they can make the best decision.
Sure, sure. And, to speak to what we have here up on the screen at the moment, I mean, taxpayers are unaware of all the different strategies. I've always found, and again, kind of grew up in an accounting family and working with, I mean, one of the great things about working in public accounting, you get to see so many businesses from the inside out. You get to see from the books up. And I learned very early on doing some books for restaurants that as much as I love food and cooking, I didn't want to own a restaurant anytime soon. Likewise, you get to see different managerial styles and accounting styles that work and don't. But we get to see a lot and then be able to take that experience and share it with other people. But taxpayers, I mean, if they're a restaurateur, they're focused on owning a restaurant and running all the restaurant. They don't get to see and think about some of the big picture stuff. And I've always found that accounting is an afterthought for a lot of these people. It's something they don't like, they're not interested in. If they're a restaurateur, they like cooking probably, or being with people and maybe coming up with new recipes. But finding tax strategies or reducing, they want the reduction in tax liability, but they don't want to do the legwork to really kind of find that themselves. And so it really does have to be the practitioner that kind of pulls all this together.
I think it's kind of, it's a unique problem because the taxpayers, some of them think they're not getting what they should be getting. However, I would say most taxpayers in the United States kind of have this idea that my tax person's pretty good. They got it handled. They're doing it. And a lot of times they'll go out and tell their friends like, oh my gosh, my tax guy, Jim,
the best ever.
Is the best ever. And I'm paying $700. You got to work with them too, or her too. And
completely different circumstances, different everything.
Right. And that tax professional back there is actually kind of scared because they see this person out there kind of making these recommendations, but they know that they're not really kind of digging in. They're not really dealing with everything. The client's probably overpaying. And it's an odd problem where there's a misconception that the taxpayers think the tax advisors got it. The tax advisor kind of knows they don't have it. They feel guilty about that, even though it's not their fault. I mean, it's just that it's a very difficult problem. There's very bad tooling to be able to try and solve the problem historically. And so that creates an interesting situation where the way that I think about it is, how do you bring that in line where the taxpayer thinks their tax advisor is a genius and their tax advisor is a genius in the way that the taxpayer thinks. So, and that's the real challenge. So it's like, if you can provide a more transparent view between the two parties, then the taxpayer can say, well, this is what I want. And oh, guess what? I can actually see that you're doing it. When I was at Price Waterhouse, there was an old saying, inspect what you expect. And so if you expect that someone's doing something, just take a look at it. Sure. And the challenges right now is for the taxpayers, they can't inspect what they expect their tax advisor to be doing for them because it's too complicated. It's dark. It's happening in these tools that they don't have access to, they can't see. And so that is one of our goals, is to make the relationship much more transparent so that the taxpayers can, hold accountable and also just really know who's a great tax professional that's really solving this problem on the whole with them.
Sure. Your tool reminds me of a tool that we use in our business. So my primary, besides being an instructor for K2, I'm a software developer, and that's what we do. We make code and software for other people. But GitHub released this project called Copilot about 2 years ago, and it's now widely available. That's AI powered code writing. It doesn't replace the need for a programmer, but it makes the quality of the output of the program or the software that you're building less buggy, works generally a lot faster, and helps reduce the time of creating software, from maybe 4 hours to 2 hours, cuts it in half in some instances. And it feels like with Corvee, very similar for the practitioner. I don't have to be an expert in every single one of these. I got a co-pilot with me that's going to help navigate the way and get me from point A to point B. Well, let's go ahead and have another review question here. And I'll get your take on this, Andrew, as well. Which of the following are reasons taxpayers do not implement a tax plan? I think there's a lot of reasons here. They do not understand strategy deadlines. I mean, absolutely. I actually ran myself into that issue not too long ago, converting from a standard C to an S corporation, and just getting some of the partial year deadlines down so that I could incorporate and get that election S process in time. Man, I mean, when they say a deadline, they mean it, right? Keeping good documentation for tax strategies. That's I've always found taxpayers aren't really good at that as well. They don't have time to implement their strategies. Certainly if they're a restaurateur or a contractor, they're either building homes or in the kitchen. What do you think here? What do you think the correct answer is, Andrew? Hello? Well, I think the correct answer here would be all of the above. Okay, it looks like Andrew might be frozen here for a second. Hopefully he'll come back here in a moment. But thinking through this with respect to kind of the general for some of the general issues with respect to tax planning. Again, I've always found that practitioners are good at whatever their business is, not necessarily good at all the other stuff, whether it be the insurance, the legal, the banking, or certainly accounting and tax. I generally find those to be the big issues with practitioners.
Yeah, and I would say also, and I broke up a little bit there, but I got
No worries.
reconnected. I would say that, for most taxpayers, I think there's a lack of awareness that there's a problem, because they can't see that there's an issue. If I give my tax information to my tax professional, they go off in some secret machine that I don't have access to, and they make magic happen, and then they spit out a little black and white document that they email me or send me in a client portal.
Yeah.
Even if I get that in a certain way, I don't know what I'm looking at. And so I kind of just assume that it's good. Even if I feel like it's not, I can't specifically call anything out. And so I think that's probably the biggest reason, is that the taxpayers just aren't aware that there's a problem. And so they're not complaining about it. They're not pounding the table saying like, I want this to be better, because they might even feel it, but they don't know enough to be able to request that service from their provider.
Yeah. Yeah. And I've even found that there so many different things, but it could even be the pushback of having to pay, let's say, $500 for a tax planning meeting in November. They don't want to pay for that practitioner's time, even though it can save them potentially tens of thousands of dollars, later in the year, because there's certain things you can't do after December 31st, but if you met with your practitioner more than, on March 10th, when you're filing your 1040, you might be able to take advantage of some of these things. And that kind of leads me to something I wanted to mention. I love the story of how entrepreneurs come to exist. I know, for example, like, you spoke of how you went from not being able to buy a couch that you wanted for your home for $250 to paying off over half a hundred grand, 50 grand in student debt in the span of a year to starting Corvee. I mean, that's a long way to come, really, kind of in a short time. And while I'm sure, a lot of respects you did it the old-fashioned way, feels like Corvee could really help a practitioner do the same thing today, whether it be, planning for their taxes or even kind of giving them a bigger perspective of tax planning in general, with respect to their clients.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of firms that have worked with us that are at the very beginning stages, even just getting started, or, they maybe have like a little bit going on, but they just never been able to click with tax compliance. They, have worked with just individuals, or they've had super low fees. And so we've had just, hundreds and hundreds of firms that have worked with us that are literally just at the starting gates, or, tens of thousands or less than 100,000 a year in sales, that, they're like, I want to start a business this way. I don't want to have as much seasonality. I don't want to do just the compliance. I want to help. And so it has been a tremendous way for some people to do it. It's very interesting to see some of these firms, because, we've got kind of two groups. You've got some firms out there that kind of transition from compliance to advisory. And then there's some firms that literally they only have advisory clients. And it's really interesting to see the difference, because they don't even know what it's like to be in one of these older style of firms, because they're doing 2 million a year in sales. They're doing that with clients that are paying $8,000 a year, $2,000 a quarter on a quarterly recurring basis, no standalone annual tax preparation clients for business or individual. And so, there's a whole new sort of breed of firms out there that literally started this way and don't know anything else.
Yeah, and that leads me to kind of something else I wanted to talk about here. There's been a big push in the last, let's say, 10 years or so. And I think really we've been doing this all along, but we now have words to define what they are for, CAS, client accounting services, and advisory, even tax advisory services now. How do you feel that Corvee fits into this, for that kind of firm of the future that are maybe wanting to pursue this either outside of compliance services or outside of traditional accounting? Where do you see Corvee fitting into this?
Yeah. So, a lot of firms out there provide what you call CAS, client accounting services. We define that as having sort of 4 tiers of service: sub account management, monthly accounting, controller, and CFO services. And I know everybody kind of defines it slightly differently, but,
Sure.
we kind of look at it that way. And, we look at that client accounting service relationship. Now, there's a variety of different types of people that provide those services, some of them from what they would call themselves a bookkeeper, into an accountant or a controller or a chief financial officer. And there's all sorts of shades of those individuals. And some of those individuals are either already offering tax or want to be offering tax. And we help them offer what we call tax advisory services. And we call it TAS, right? So if somebody wants, what they can do is go to a client and offer a CAS plus TAS engagement. And it's actually ends up being all wrapped into one price for the client. You can bill them on a monthly basis or a weekly basis. And then you're really solving all of the tax and accounting, function for them based on the scope that you've agreed to. And what's really cool is, a lot of times clients are paying $12,000, $24,000, $36,000 for a CAS engagement, client accounting services. And when you come in, or even more than that, when you come in and you offer tasks, many times you end up saving the client more than what they're paying.
Sure.
For the task and for the CAS. And so you end up saving them, let's say $75,000, but all in, maybe they're paying your firm $42,000. And so you're thinking like, goodness, how could I charge one client $42,000 a year? But the reality of it is they're saving $75,000. And if you weren't adding in that task component, then for that taxpayer, right, on their P&L, right, their cash at the end of the year, they're going to have, a bill to you for, let's say, $36,000. They're also going to have what they don't know is an overpayment of $75,000 in taxes. And so once you kind of add that in, it ends up making the entire situation much more economical for the taxpayer, and they end up being able to pay a much higher fee for all the services.
Yeah, I couldn't have agree with you more. I've always been a proponent of value-based billing. Just because I can do a tax return and, let's say it's an easy 1040 and I can do it in 10 minutes, I shouldn't have to only charge $50 for that. I could still charge 300. I mean, you're paying for that 10 minutes, but you're also paying for the, 2 decades of experience and the college education and everything else that goes into it. But I've always found the reluctance, I found that a lot of practitioners, especially small practitioners, small and mid firm. I'm not talking, the big four. I don't think they have any problem billing. But so much of it is based off of the price per form, and they're unwilling to, charge, really what the value they're adding to their clients is. And I view, something like Corvee, where again, if you can demonstrate saving the client 50 grand, I mean, that's worth something above and beyond just the hours of your life that you spent putting those forms together for them.
Yeah, well, and I always say, when somebody comes in with that kind of worry or fear, I think the challenge is it's very sort of me focused. Like, I'm afraid of charging that, and I'm afraid of changing and so forth. But I always just kind of focus on the taxpayer, and I'm just like, okay, what would the taxpayer want in an ideal situation? And I think the answer is that if they could get the savings, that's the most important piece. And getting the savings is generally the most important. That's what's owed to them as a taxpayer. It's what the politicians set up a variety of things that they may or may not be interested in. And so they're sort of owed the ability to take advantage of those based on the way that society is set up. And that's the most important thing. Now, what you end up charging for that, it's going to be on a spectrum, depending upon how you want to structure it and what you want to do. But what you end up finding is that the savings is so much more than what you thought in so many instances, that if you charge, if you're used to charging just for the one form, let's say charge, industry average is like $800 for a business return, like an 1120S. And let's say you go into this situation and you end up charging them, $4,000 a year to do that and to do a little bit of planning with them just on that one form. That seems like, oh my gosh, that's so high. But if they're saving, 30,000 or 40,000, it kind of just, the client doesn't really care. Like, in fact, they can kind of be grateful and happy, and they're not paying attention to how much more they paid you, because they didn't pay you more in their mind, right? In their mind, they got the savings. Yes, you're charging in that example another $3,300, but they saved another $40,000. And so it's free. Your increase of $3,300 to them feels free. It feels like it doesn't cost anything. What costed them something was paying the $700 and losing the $40,000. And so I always just think it's like, you've got to be careful to focus on the client and what they want and what is in their mind more than your own mind and your fear of changing. Because once you do that, it becomes a lot easier. It doesn't mean that no one's going to say, hey, what's going on here? Why weren't you providing this? And that's the other kind of fear people get into. But the reality of it is that, you never promised you were doing tax planning. Most people, they're just promising, I'm doing tax preparation, I'm just filing the return. This is a new engagement. It's a different type of thing. I've learned from some of the best people in the world now. We're having a different conversation. We're going to solve this in a new way. And I estimate there is the 40,000 in savings. And so there's a way to sort of approach those conversations without it getting all messy.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's a new skill set for the new practitioner. I think this is going to be a skill set that's going to take them into this next decade, and I feel like if we don't continue kind of walking up that value chain, the automation on the back end of this is, if you're building your business on simple 1040s and simple business tax returns, you might find that companies like Intuit, for the most part, are going to take that business away from you. You got to find these higher value engagements, and I think a lot of that can come from tax planning. Where you're working maybe with less people, but you're earning more value per client than you were before. So I know, and I know we're getting towards the end of our time here. Corvee, I mean, you guys are working with over 1,700 different tax strategies now, both at the federal and state level. I know that, for example, you're also outside of the tax planning. You have a full firm administration with document management and portal and as well as billing solutions and more. Maybe if you wouldn't mind, just share us outside of the tax planning, if there's any thoughts that you might have with respect to the other services Corvee is offering that our listeners might find interesting.
Well, one of the things that we discovered was when you look at tax planning, one of the most difficult things is just getting the information from the client. You get the return, you scan the return, but that's not the end. That's really just the beginning. Just because I can see your return and I can see how much you paid, I've got to get a lot of other information about what are the things that you did that maybe aren't in the return, or what are the things that you'd be willing to do that aren't in the return because you didn't do them, but you would do them. And so you've got to ask a variety of additional questions. So outside of just tax planning with Corvee, you're able to do your entire client portal, all of your agreements, engagement letters, questionnaires, which we actually created a dynamic questionnaire that asks them for each entity different questions to be able to find all the savings opportunities. So for the 1040, for each of the schedules, for each of the incorporated entities, and based on, okay, what type of business is, if it's a real estate business, we're going to ask different questions than if we're doing a law firm and so forth. And so it's going to whittle down just the things that matter to the client. But so we do that: agreements, engagement letters, questionnaires, file requests, client payments. And so it makes it a lot easier to get all that information from the client and have one place where every single touch point with the client is there in the client portal. You can message them back and forth, send them reminders for everything that they need to send. And so for doing quarterly recurring tax advisory services or one-time tax plans or annual tax preparation, it's a much better way to get all that information from the client.
Yeah, it really feels like it's a one-stop shop with respect to firm administration and management of clients. I mean, just keeping track of all these different projects, the client, where different stages of documentation are being required, the approaches they want to take. It feels like I can do all of this under one roof with Corvee.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, let's go ahead and have our final review question for the day. How many different strategies Corvee currently use to build a tax plan? Is it 500, 1,000, 1,500, or is it over 1,700? Andrew, I'll leave it to you. What's the correct answer here?
Yeah, it's a little over 1,700 strategies today, and we're adding new ones all the time. And so we'll see where we end up by the end of the year.
Excellent. And so, 500, 1,000, 1,500. Certainly we can do all of those, but we're actually going over 1,700 now. And I think I read somewhere that you guys are planning on expanding this to like 20,000, in the coming years.
That's how many we think there are. That really, once you cover about 20,000 in the United States, that you're going to have the majority of the use cases. And so I think that's really where, we think, the way that we define what is a strategy, that's really where we think we can get to.
Sure. Absolutely. Well, unfortunately, our time is drawing to a close here. And before we go, though, I do want to let our listeners know, and as a offer from Corvee to you, please consider reaching out to them. They've got a special deal set up here for K2. Just let them know that you listen to this, and they're offering $1,000 off their annual subscription, which is a tremendous value to the practitioner. And from my perspective, I mean, with software like this is something I look at that's going to make me money, as a tax practitioner. This is going to be something that it's offering a new skill and ability and a new service that I could potentially offer my clients. And, with this application, you're going to find new ways to engage and hopefully be able to build your practice in a much more effective way than I think you would without this particular solution. Well, today we discussed a lot. We talked a lot about tax planning, the application. We learned a little bit more about Andrew and his background and where he was coming from with building of this particular solution in Corvee, as well as some of the big issues that face the profession these days. Tax planning is not easy. You either need to have an extreme amount of knowledge, which is pretty difficult to acquire, or you got to have somebody in your firm that has that, and that may or may not be an option. But I think, as I mentioned earlier, I feel that Corvee democratizes this and makes tax planning available to practitioners of all sizes and all firms of all sizes as well. And so your small guy, on Main Street can compete with either a mid or a large level firm that has access to these people. You can do it all right inside of Corvee. It's something that can bring that years of knowledge and insight to the profession. And so as a reminder here, if you're watching this on YouTube or Facebook, if you'd like to get some CPE credit for it, you certainly can. Head on over to cpetoday.com and go ahead and search Corvee. Today's course code is Corvee2. You'll take a short 5-question quiz and you will earn a CPE credit for watching or listening. Andrew, I'll give you the last word, man. Is there anything in particular you'd like folks to know about Corvee? Anything in particular on the horizon that you'd like to share for folks to maybe come check this out?
Yeah, well, Steve, I'd just like to say thank you for having us on today and kind of letting us talk a little bit about what we're doing and, our mission of empowering smarter tax decisions. And if anybody has any questions, would love to show you a little bit more about what we do to help tax professionals move from compliance to advisory services. And
absolutely,
the team was able to set up the discount. So would love to see everybody on the other side.
Yeah, absolutely, folks. Please consider reaching out. They do some demos here, I know, pretty regularly, and their sales team and client success team are here to answer whatever questions you might have in terms of building this. And I've got to say, I've loved your YouTube channel. You guys have some great videos and walkthroughs and the support documentation, even for, at all skill levels and knowledge levels, I feel like are provided here. And you can take people from beginning all the way to the end, and this is a great way of getting started and pursuing some of these higher value engagements with your clients. Well, folks, thank you so much for your time and attention. A big thank you to Andrew and Sarah on his team. Really appreciate, with respect to all of you coming. Your CPE certificates will be emailed out to you if you're watching live. If you're watching after the fact, they'll be generated once you pass our exam. Andrew, thank you so much, sir. I hope we have a chance to do this again. And for those of you who are watching, please stay tuned. We're going to have some other episodes here in the very near future, walking through Corvee on a hands-on. My good friend and colleague, Randy Johnston, will be doing at least one, if not two episodes, doing actual hands-on tax planning, giving you a sense of how this application works and functions. Andrew, have a great rest of your day. Thank you, sir.
Steve, you as well.
Take care.